Hey everyone, welcome back to Cosmic Brew. Today is the promised Sunday episode I mentioned in the last episode. Normally these podcasts won't have a hook like this with a hook and here's what to expect. And then because my attitude is I just start talking and you'll listen as long as it's relevant to you. And if you are interested, listen. If not, not. That's what this podcast is. But this is an example, a great example. Well, two things. There's some updates you need to know, but also this is a great example of what you can expect from the podcast. So the last episode was State of the Union. It was politics. It was fast. It was news events. It was culture. It was relating it to the bigger macro forces of astrology, which is the primary focus of what this podcast was, Cosmic Alarm Clock. What that's going to look like moving forward if I'm chit-chatting with people and it's more of a collective discussion, that might be 2026. And in the middle, as we're merging and mutating, which is important to the subject of this podcast episode and the fact that I'm dropping it during eclipse season and what eclipses mean and what thresholds really are, which is not a quantum leap. You don't wake up one day as a new person. It's a mutation going on in the background. And you're going to want to remember that. That's a seed planting for a potential future episode, either here or on my other podcast, Clear Signal. So mutation is not clean. And so this episode is a little bit of a hybrid, and it is talking about kind of like personalized astrology, but also collective astrology, but it's also just like bringing in some examples from business. And so that's what this podcast can expect. So what this podcast episode is talking about Mars going into Scorpio this week, why it is relevant to the masterclass I did last year and why I brought it up, what this has to do with the eclipse season, what this has to do with an episode I dropped in November of 2023. It's in the feed. I'll probably link it in the show notes, maybe not at the time of drop, but the Mars Sun conjunction in Scorpio, November of 2023. And in the future, I will be doing an episode in January related to this, and this sets us up for that. So that is why I'm talking about this. By the way, that is why I talked about Aries so much in season 1 of my other podcast. That is why I brought up the Fool card relentlessly. That's why I talk about death and rebirth so much in season 1. The number 13, the number 11, Scorpio. There's an episode about snakes. There is a lot of stuff about 1111 and you're building a foundation. And I talked about Saturn and I talked about Saturn going into Aries. That will pay off. All of that will pay off in the future. And whether or not you get the line doesn't matter. You're going to get something from this episode regardless of if you understand what I just said. But that's why I'm randomly throwing this in here, because I did an episode and then it was going to drop on last week about the eclipse. And then we had the State of the Union double parter. And so then I did this one. And so it's out of order. So this would have been after the one I'm going to do next. I think I'll do that on 10/1. And speaking of 10/1, the eclipse readings expire end of day 10/1. Link in the show notes if you want to check that out. You want to understand what this entire 6-month period is for you, what's shifting for you, where you're in the dark, how can you leverage this in your business and your career, what is coming up to be shifted. If you read the sales page, that is what I do for people. If you think 15 minutes cannot change your life, you have not met me yet. So link in the show notes. And now we'll get into the episode. Hey everyone, a rare Sunday drop. So I was like, frick it with the editing. I'm not going to bother. Some things are not worth the energy. And that's a big part of what I think we are facing as we wind down this year. All the planets are retrograde. Saturn's gone back into Pisces. Neptune is soon in Pisces. And it's like, let's not push. Okay, let's not push. So we're rolling with it. But I said I'd come back and talk about this, and I'm dropping it on a Sunday for a reason. And this is what I mentioned in the first drop of the week. You got 3 drops this week. And then, like I said, we're going to take a step back. And if you want to know why I'm releasing this now, you can listen to Monday's episode. I'd mentioned the Primal Energy Masterclass. By the way, that's always available. That's linked in the show notes. And that was the epic double masterclass that I did in December of 2024 that involved both Pluto going into Aquarius and Mars going retrograde in Cancer. Mars went retrograde in Cancer last when I was born. I can say very soon I'll be able to say I'm turning 50 next year. So you can do the math on that. It is a very rare event. Mars is life force. And Pluto going into Aquarius at the same time, 1-2 punch, never going to be seen again. So I did a class I'm never going to do again $44 because Pluto will be in Aquarius through 2024. People loved it. Sales page, always available. Check it out. So why did it want to come to when I was channeling the other day? And then I channeled it and I said some stuff I don't want to say in a mic because sometimes I go a little too far. And there's a difference between like being like free spirited and saying stuff that you would regret having in public. So I have a judgment to know what's what. So, and I mentioned last time that I don't use editing software for this particular project. So I was like, fuck it. We're going to do it again. So what I just said is extremely honest, right? I am Scorpio rising. What you see is what you get. And it makes people uncomfortable or they're magnetized. But you never know, you're never confused about where I stand with you. Because not only am I Scorpio rising, I'm from New England. If you've never been from New England, something that people love it or leave it about New England, people will say that you know where you stand. It is cultural here. So it's a little bit of a double with me. But anyway, this has to do with Scorpio. This has to do with Mars. This has to do with Pluto. This has to do with why I mentioned the class last time. It is because on Monday, Mars moved into Scorpio. Like I said, I would have normally brought this in, but it came in when I was talking about the readings. And then I was like, promised to come back and talk about it. And I want to talk about it because it's a throwback to an episode I did 2 years ago. It's on the feed. It's labeled. You can check it out. So I'm not going to go into a deep dive because I already did the deep dive. But today is Sunday, and that is the sun's day. And the Mars and the sun have a special relationship. Mars is your life force energy. Mars is your hero's journey in life. Mars is your life force. Mars is your sexual drive, but all that. We're going to go basic here. We're not doing business here. You can apply this to whatever. And if you want to apply it to business, it's like money. Because if you think about you're in your body, what's your life force? It's your blood, right? Red. Mars is red, anger or blood. That's when your blood boils when you're angry. Or it's like the life force of something, which is a life force of a business, life force of a life force of whatever you've got going on. You know, that's why people talk about business. It's sometimes when you're in a startup mode, I've done startups. It's not about thriving. It's not about making money. It's not about looking, you're like, am I going to run out of runway this month? Am I going to go bankrupt this month? That's what a real business is. I'm not saying that coaching is not a real business, but it's different. It's different. You know, I've never had permanent employees and W-2 employees. I've chosen not to do that overhead. But if someone has like a lease, like a gym or whatever, like you are trying to make that lease payment every month, you run out of runway, you're fucked. That's blood. That is the life force of a business. Sun is your purpose in traditional ways that spiritual people talk about it. I call it your vitality, which is important because I think purpose is a loaded word. And I think it's get thrown around a lot. And it is, use it if you feel it. I don't. I'm going to say what lights you up. Because my definition of a purpose is to be a happy human. That is my goal. And purpose feels a little loaded to me. Going back to what I said in my other episode, I'm not love and light. I'm not your typical spiritualist. I think you can pick up on that. So we do things differently around here, but you do you. Mars is life force. They are kumbaya. They are copacetic. If you listen to my other podcast, when I talked about astrology, in episode 1, I talked a lot about Aries. Way a lot more than you would expect from a business podcast. Way a lot more than you would expect for a human design podcast. I think there's 5 episodes where I brought up Aries. There is an episode about Venus moving into Aries. There is an episode about the double conjunction. There is an episode about the cosmic, what you can expect for 2025. There's an episode that at some point had Kris Jenner in the title. I think it's episode 38. I don't know what the title is now because I changed titles. People do that if you don't know that. And it had to do with Aries and what Aries was when I graduated from college, which was a throwback to last time Saturn was in Aries for me and my first job, and a story about how taking initiative, Aries, and not worrying about what other people think is how I got the gold. Because your sun is also your career. And so that set me up in my career. Aries, first step, take the first step. And I also did an episode that I'm not sure if it's going to be back up at this time. And these are astrology related, which is why I'm bringing it in. I've taken it down because I need to update the brand because the brand has changed, but it's going back up. Don't worry, it's going back up. And I talked a lot about when the brand was first called the podcast was called The Aligned Alchemist, and then the brand was called Aligned Alchemist. And it was a whole notion about the book by Paul Coelho, The Alchemist, and how that was a muse for this brand. It was a muse for this project, and which is originally called The Unscripted Path, was one of the names of the podcast. So, and this is important because Scorpio, if you're Scorpio rising like I am, you're going to reinvent yourself a lot. You're going to reinvent yourself a lot, and it's going to look weird to people who are comfortable with change. People who want to stay the same are not comfortable around me because I'm going to unconsciously signal to them, not only can I see you, nothing gets past me. So, don't even try. It won't work. And number two, if I work with clients, they know I can see shit, and they either want me to see shit and say it to them, or they want, that makes them uncomfortable. And number three, like, I change a lot. So, if you don't trust that, then bye. So Scorpio, Mars, Sun, business, career. And so that is that. And so in the Fool episode, I had talked about, in that episode, I talked a lot about the Fool card in tarot. So I related the Fool card, which is a 0 card. We start at the journey, we end the journey. That's what the snake is. We shed, we release. In Greek mythology, the snake is eating its tail. I forget what it's called. It's called something. I wish I could look it up right now, but I won't. This is why I wish I could edit. But it's a Greek thing. Like if you Google Greek O and snake, you'll find the name. It's a concept, and it's a snake eating its tail, right? And we shed, but then we start the new cycle. That's what eclipses are about. That's what new moons and full moons are about. That's what year of the snake is. That's what numerology is, right? And that's why it's such a big deal that we're in a 9-year and a year of the snake. And this is relevant to what I'm talking about. I get where I get, where I'm going to get, when I'm going to get it. Okay. In case you are new to me, in this particular project, that's what we do here. That's what we do here. So that's the snake. And that's the time we're in right now. Very, very important to understand. That's the time we're in right now. And if you understand human design, Pluto leaves gate 60 in the channel of mutation on December 9th. A 9-day and a 9-year. Can you make it up? Can we get more dramatic? We can't. Let's keep going. How more dramatic do we want to be? Right? And I shared last time in the last episode why this eclipse was wicked dramatic. I shared that. So, and there was a special thing I hadn't shared in the prior free content, and I gave into my clients in the private training, because I was like, you need to know this, because one person of the reading, she had the eclipse at the degree. She had the eclipse at 29 degrees. And I'm like, holy moly. So, you wonder why people get readings. This is what I mean. It never fails. They know. Some part of them knows they're ready for the message, right? And that's what I was talking about in prior, about you got to be ready for the message. All right. And ready in general. So Scorpio, Sun, Mars, life force, blood, shedding, transformation, reinvention. Okay. And no bullshit. And what you see is what you get. And love it or leave it. That is a Scorpio rising. It is a love it and leave it. Okay. So we're on a Sunday. And so in that episode about the Fool's Journey, I talked about the Fool of the hero's journey, which is the Fool card. And the hero's journey is also the story of the alchemist. Okay. And then the finding your gold, right? My name of my brand is Aligned Gold. That's a nod and a wink to that. We'll talk about that in the future when I introduce the brand fully. But, think about your inner gold. It's not just money, but it's also your light. It's both. And so, okay, you get the backstory. So in that episode, I talked a lot about Aries. Why? Because it was correlating Aries being the fool, the risk taker, the entrepreneur, the jump off the cliff, and correlating that to the tarot's journey of the Fool card, which is literally in the Rider-Waite deck. He's jumping off a cliff blissfully because he doesn't know what, in that story I talked about college, if you listen to both podcasts, what I did was foolish. What I did could have really screwed up my reputation. What I did could have really screwed up this job that I took a long time to get because I didn't know any better. And it was a risk that I took and it paid off. But the only reason I took that risk is because I didn't know. Not only did I not know about like proper culture, working culture, because I was new to working culture because I just graduated from college, but I also didn't know who the person was I was talking to. This was a very high up person. I can't articulate. It's hard to describe because the world is less hierarchical than it is now. In some ways, yes, we have leaders that control us in dictatorship. I'm talking, but in companies, like we have a more kumbaya, love and light. But go back to 1999. For those of you who didn't work in 1999, we were wearing shoulder pads. Women were wearing shoulder pads in 1999, in case you don't understand what that was like. So you didn't go up to a managing director as a college student. You didn't talk to people. You didn't go into their office. You weren't allowed to look at them. It was a very different world. Okay. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that's what it was. So for me to do that was frankly insane. And when I talk about entrepreneurship and my other podcast, I'll talk about some of my stories, which I'm probably going to do on camera. So I'm going to do them next year. You're going to think I'm insane. You're going to think I'm insane. And looking back, I was insane. Would I ever do what I did again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Insanity. And, I mentioned that in the coffee episode, and that one might be relevant to folks here because that's more of a spiritual episode. It has coffee in the title, and it's about manifestation when you're broke. And I share some stories, and it worked out. But the situations I put myself in were insane. And you're going to hear entrepreneurs talk about that all the time. And that's what I like to hear. I like to hear those stories. I'm not trying to loud poverty consciousness. I'm not trying to loud, you need to be struggling or you're not successful, but there's something about when your back is against the line and you have nothing and you still choose the hard decision. You still choose to be like, you know what? I could go this way, but I'm going to do the hard thing. There is something that happens to you when you do that. And this is relevant to this podcast. A long time ago, just because we're talking about cosmic brew, I got to bring this in. I talked about chai last time. I got to bring it in. Earlier this week, I talked about chai. A long time ago, used to go to these conferences, and this was when I was in the natural products world. So I would go to these conferences and go to these breakout sessions. This was in California a lot. And that's a huge industry, at least it was back in 2000s. And I would see these founders speak. And I don't remember anything anybody said. I don't remember anything anybody said. And I don't remember any analysts said. I don't remember any blowhards. I don't remember any white dudes who got on stage and talked about how awesome they were. I don't remember any of those people. I remember the woman who started Bhakti Chai. She was from Colorado. Her name is Brooke. And she was a pioneer in the industry of chai. I have my issues with it because it definitely, whatever, right? Absconsion a little bit, but fine. And the name, I'm not sure about that, but she brought that to the masses, right? She's a white blonde woman from Colorado, and she brought that to the masses in a bottled, something people could do. It was like a cold brew you bought in the fridge. Huge pioneer to the space. She was speaking, and she talked about a time when she literally, she knew, the guy was going to come to, I don't know. I don't quite understand. I'm sorry. I'm not going to get the story right, which kind of screws it up. But let's pretend someone was going to drop off bills. It could have been the postman. It could have been someone who was trying to get money from her and she couldn't pay it. She knew when the guy was going to come and she literally get in the car and drive around the block. Because if I'm hearing the story, this might have been the late 90s or whatever, different time. You could everything was done in person and you could kind of avoid people. If you avoided people, you avoided the situation. Unfortunately, we can't do that now, right? Now we have a tracking device in our pocket. But I'm not good at, I didn't plan to tell this story, so I didn't recall it, but you get, that's what stuck out in me. She's like, everything was on the line. She's like, I didn't even know I was going to pay the electric bill. And I was like, I'm going to be in it to win it. And that's what I value about entrepreneur stories, because that to me is way more interesting than the Ponzi scheme performative bullshit we see on Instagram. All right, let's get back to that. Why is that important about Scorpio? And why is that important about business? And why is that important about Mars? And why is that important about Aries? Because all of those stories are relevant. It's someone who said, I'm going to do this and I'm just going to fucking do it. So what this has to do with astrology and the masterclass and Pluto is power. Pluto is not power in what we see in dictators. Pluto is not power what we're seeing now. Pluto is not I don't like what you said, so I'm taking you off the air. Pluto is not divide and conquer strategies, which is what we're seeing in the US. And anybody who's a person of color, you understand the history of the world. This has been a strategy that has been used by certain people to control other people, because when you divide people, you can control them. especially when there's a minority number situation, right? Like South Africa, India, other places, right? You control by you dividing. And that's a future podcast we're going to talk about. And now you can't do that as much with Uranus and Gemini, but that's 2026, 2027. So let's get there. But the point is that come back to today and come back to why I came on here is that power comes from within. Pluto is power from within. Pluto is that root chakra, Kali, divine force energy in us that cannot be fucked with. Pluto is alchemy. The channel of mutation is alchemy. We're in a 9 year, which is alchemy, because a 9 goes into a 1. There's no ending. We just go back into a 1. We're in the snake year. In a proper definition of a snake, you start and you finish. Eclipses are a cycle. You picking up what I'm putting down? You understand what I'm saying this week? You understand why I'm talking about it? We started on a Monday, which is the moon. We're ending on a Sunday, which is the sun. The duality of light and dark, that is Kali. That is the dark goddess. She destroys to create. That's Pluto. That is what is this mutative force that's in the water right now. We're never going to get this again in our life, you guys. I don't care if you're listening to me and you're 18 years old. I hope you're at least 18 if you're listening to me. I don't know why you'd be. But you're never going to, none of us are. That is the power of this time. And so that's why I did that masterclass. When I said one and done, I wasn't fucking around. When I said that $88 blah, 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 I wasn't fucking around. I don't do stuff like that because it takes more time to do them and deliver them than it is. It's just not worth it for me. However, I enjoy doing that. If I had a huge audience, maybe I'd do a $44 masterclass, but it doesn't make sense for me. But that was such an important time that I had to do it. And it was a huge double masterclass. I talked all about Pluto going to Aquarius, and I talked about all Mars going retrograde in Cancer, what it means. By the way, that's a cycle. It's a cycle. It's not about that fucking time. And it's coming back now. I'm just coming back by, and here's why. So I did that double class because Mars is the lower octave of Pluto. Right? The modern ruler of Scorpio is Pluto. The ancient ruler is Mars. They have a correlation. They work together. When you know who you are, and when you have been alchemized, which is one of the stuff I'm going to talk about in the future on my other podcast, when you've been through stuff, nobody can fuck with you. That's power. Power is not your title. Power is not what's in your bank account. Power is not what you have 1 billion in TikTok followers. Power is nobody can fuck with you because you know who you are. You know what you came here to do, and you're going to go do it. Period. That's the people I work with. So Mars, Pluto, joining hands, you get it. That's why it was related to that. That's why there was, I think I changed the image. I got to change it back. There was like a reptilian eye image. If you went to the original sales page, I'll move it back. And that's what that was. It looked almost like a lizard. That was Pluto. That was the snake. That was the id inside each of us. Pluto's also the subconscious mind, and the moon is a subconscious mind. If you guys are students of astrology, there is a woman, Demetra George. She's big in asteroids, which is not my big thing. If you heard my other one where I talked about Regulus, and I was like, here's what you need to know, but I'm not really a fixed star person. I'm not an asteroid person either. In astrology, unless you're going to be a pure play astrologer, which I'm not, you gotta kind of pick. Like I'm a 5-1. I'm like, here's what you need to know. Here's the framework. Here's the pits of this framework. Let's put it into a system. If I was to go all in astrology, I might look at asteroids, but it really just depends if they speak to you or not. It could be something I'm interested in later. Like lately, I'm probably going to be taking a class soon on aspects. If you don't know what aspects are like yod, quincunx, things like that. It's the geometry of astrology, the precision geometry of astrology. And I know that stuff at a back of the envelope. I might want to go deeper. I'm a 1 line, so I'm going to go into deep depth. So that's like a precision expert master level astrological angles. That's aspects, right? So that's what's interesting me now. So like asteroids are not my thing, but she's a big on the asteroids. She also has a great book called, I'm not going to remember it, but just look her up, Demetra George, Power of the Dark Moon. That's not the correct name, but if you put Dark Moon and Demetra George in Google, you'll find it. I have the book and I have the workbook. And if you think about the dark moon in the menstrual cycle is we're shedding every month. And so the Western world loves to be new moon manifestation circle. When I talked about me not being with a drum in the forest, I'm sure this is going to offend a lot of people, but I don't give a fuck. This is not like we're a bunch of white women sitting in a forest banging a drum and chanting on the new moon, right? There's a time for that, but we also let's also honor the dark goddess. The Asian communities honor the dark goddess. They honor Kale, Hecate, Demeter, Persephone. And I'm sure that's true in East Asian cultures. I'm not as familiar with East Asian astrology or philosophy. Very, very surface knowledge of that part of the world. And same with Africa. I know Asia, I know India, and I know Greek, because Greek mythology is so weaved into astrology that you have to understand Greek mythology a little bit to understand the planetary archetypes and the meanings behind them. And the language too. A lot of the language of our, the root stuff of our stuff is Latin and Greek and stuff like that. So you really have to understand those cultures a little bit to understand the real nuance. For example, Pluto is Greek for wealth, right? And so the wealth of us is really at the core of us. It's not the surface bullshit, which is what our Western society has sold us, which Instagram has sold us, which is what social media is going to sell you, which is what, designer clothes are going to sell you. Those are good. You take power in the world by how you look. There's nothing wrong with that. But you get it. You got it. There's something that is, and those people who have that, it doesn't matter. They don't need anything because they don't care what people think. There's a real power in not caring what people think, which is something that's a big message of my other podcast. Because that podcast is about selling and influencing and a new way of influencing and a new way of moving through the world and a modern approach to decision making and a more feminine approach to decision making. If I was to encapsulate that in a nutshell, yes, it's framed in human design. Yes, we talk about business. Yes, we talk about making money, but that is the underlying message behind it. And before you focus on all of your tactics and the frameworks and the packaging and the fancy website and whatever the fuck else, and getting the stylist so you take power when you go on stage and you look good, if you are worried about what other people think, game over. You've given your power away right there. Pluto, Mars, money, life force. We went on a journey. Stay with me on the journey. So that's what's happening today. And so on that episode, which I brought up late because you can go listen to that if you want to, it's already there for you, is that 2 years ago on November 18th, Mars and the Sun conjunct in Scorpio. Mars and the Sun conjunct every 2 years. But the fact that they conjunct in Scorpio, I probably said it in that episode. And like I said, it's in the titles. That is rare. And for all the reasons I shared, that Scorpio has a much, much more layer of power than your traditional sign. So you've got power meets power meets power. Okay. And so that was a big deal. And that was a 2-year seed planting that is now going to come into fruition in a couple months. And I probably won't come back and talk about it, but you'll have these. Okay. And so what happened on Monday? The day that I wanted to come back and talk about how dramatic that thing was I said last time, that was also the day that Mars moved into Scorpio. And Mars is at home in Scorpio. It's very powerful in Scorpio. And if you can believe it, this is why, Mars has not been strong since like October of last year. For a number of reasons, which I explained in the masterclass. So now we are starting, and what's really, really, really interesting about this is that when I said last time, I think this is a throwback to last year, I didn't even put those two together. But right around the time that Mars got kind of weak was around the eclipse of 2024, the one in October 2nd, which we're now coming full circle on, right? So we're coming full circle. And there's probably been a lot of stuff that's been going on. All this is going to depend on where this is happening for you, yada, yada, how personal, blah, blah, blah. But that conjunction was a big deal. And we're coming into the 2 years. And we talk about the moon and the light and the dark. Well, if you follow moons, which I do, obviously, then about at 48 hours, you're going to start to see a crescent moon, right? It's going to be dark for 2 days. It's dark for the last 2 days, and it's light for the first 2 days. You seed plant in that, and you shed in the other. And we focus on the first one in Western spiritual bullshit. We don't focus on the shedding part at all. And that's just as important, because you think of what Kali does. She destroys to create. If you want to buy new shirts, you have to clear out your closet of the other shirt. You get how this works. You got to shed the old to start the new. So that's what's happening. Mars entered Scorpio, really powerful. That's what relates to Pluto. That's what relates to that masterclass. That's what relates to what happened last year. That's what relates to all this stuff. And it's what I said 2 years ago. Okay. Like I said, we've been building this for a long time. I've been telling you what's happening for a long time. I've been clocking it. I got receipts. We're here. And so all of this was setting the foundation, my friends. All of this was setting the foundation. Because moving forward, I won't be talking about every little thing related to astrology like this, but we have the foundation of what's happening in the society and business and culture, which is what I'll be talking about in 2026. And on my other podcast, if you are someone who listens to all the episodes, or you're someone who is still with me after season 1, you get what I'm saying. I had to set the foundation of where business is going to go in 2026 before we could talk about all that stuff. No one's talking about that. You listen to other business podcasts, they're going to sell you a bunch of bullshit, whatever. They probably don't even know. It's fine. But I would rather to put that on the podcast and look like the podcast was directionless and had no direction and was kind of weird. I'd rather do that and have that as a foundation for season 1. So when the shit gets real next year, I can be like, yeah, go listen to that episode, man. I told you. This is what's coming. And it affects human design, which is what I talk about on that podcast, because human design is about shedding who you thought you needed to be so you could be who you're truly meant to be. And if you know that famous quote from The Alchemist, that's the same notion. So my friends, if you are interested in the eclipse readings, that is going to expire on 10/1, which I believe is this week. You will not hear from me again before that. This is your last warning, going once, going twice. And you heard last time how incredible of an experience this is for people. And it never fails. And we're still in the eclipse shed, and it will be in the eclipse shed for a long time. So enjoy it. And I'll be back with my promised episodes. Thank you so much. Take some time on 11/18. Think back to what the last 2 years have been for you. Look at where this is happening for you, if you have the math to do that. And take a moment to pause and reflect. And you might be interested as what's happened since then. I'll see you when I see you.